The large reception room of the Crescent Hotel was still dimly lit as the clock struck 2 a.m. The hallway that led past the reception desk was long, its polished tiles reflecting the flickering light and the wind rustling through the old windows was a whisper. The night receptionist named Mara had just finished her first 8-hour shift in the stifling silence. She listened for small noises, the creaking of the wooden floorboards, the cold breaths in the hallway, and the occasional footstep as if someone had just walked across the red carpet outside the hallway of room 612. The hotel was built in the late 19th century as a former residence for a noble family and was later converted into a luxury hotel. It is rumored by staff and longtime guests that the 6th floor, particularly room 612 and the hallway number leading to it, is the site of paranormal activity, flickering lights, shadowy figures in corners, the feeling that someone is standing behind you when no one is there. These stories have been told on Reddit under the heading, "Night Shifters Ever Witnessed a Paranormal Activity?" I work the night shift in a hotel. It's a pretty old building, so lots of weird stuff happening. Today, Mara was given the additional task of patrolling the corridors from the 5th to the 6th floors, checking for empty rooms and making sure there were no leaks or faulty lights. The assistant manager had pressured her to take responsibility for any complaints about strange lights or sounds. She carried a small flashlight and a walkie-talkie in her pocket and walked very lightly up the stairs. When she reached the 6th floor, the air was much colder, and an old smell, the smell of damp wood. The breath of old wooden floors infiltrated her nose. Mara opened the door to room 612, which had been vacant for weeks. She turned on the light, and it glowed, confirming that there were no visitors inside. The windows were closed. The carpet was a little shaggy, like someone had just dragged it across it, but there were no footprints. She heard a faint rustling from behind the antique wooden cabinet, the flashlight beam gliding across the old wood. Her heart was pounding. She told herself it could just be a gnawing animal, or a leaking pipe, or a breeze coming through the small crack in the window. After checking the corners, Mara turned to leave the room, but the light from the small hallway projector in the hallway was flickering. Her shadow seemed stretched and distorted. She paused, her heart pounding in her chest. She wondered if someone was standing in the hallway looking into the room through the crack in the door. The hallway light now cast a deeper darkness. Mara glanced down the nearby stairwell, a shadowy figure, humanoid in shape, but with no face. She swallowed dryly, her hands shaking the flashlight, capturing the outline of a bare wrist as it stepped out and then disappeared. She called softly into the walkie-talkie, "Is anyone there?" Her voice echoed through the intercom, but there was no response. Mara left the room, walking down the creaky wooden hallway, blood running down her back. She had to keep going, check the room at the other end of the hallway, but her steps were heavy. Every step was accompanied by the creaking of wood, sometimes a muffled whisper, "Go away," or "Not mine." For a moment, the flickering light of the hallway flickered in the corner of her eye. A door to the left was ajar, the space inside pitch black, and something seemed to fall like a scarf or a coat inside the room. Mara froze. She felt watched, her skin crawling. "I have to stay calm," she told herself. "Don't panic." She walked to the door, touching the cold frame. There was no wind from inside, no sound. She flicked the flashlight through the cracks, the ceiling, the walls. Everything was fine. As she backed away, the hallway lights went out. The entire hallway was plunged into darkness, save for a small lamp in the opposite hallway. Mara grunted as she backed toward the stairwell, feeling the pull of gravity pull her feet harder. Suddenly, from room 612 came a soft sigh, not like a normal human breath, but like someone trying to pull air between their lips, long and melancholy. She stopped, her heart as tight as a bowstring. "Please, someone, if anyone," she said again, her voice trembling. There was no answer. Just that breathing drawn out, then dead. Mara was stunned, her heart pounding, her eyes stinging. She left room 612 running down the stairs, ignoring the echoing footsteps behind her. As she was leaving the 6th floor, she heard the door to room 612 slam shut, not from inside, but as if pushed. The door slammed. She turned around. My manager would be shocked if he knew. She didn't want to get fired for talking nonsense, but something happened. When Mara returned to the front desk, it was 3 a.m. She sat down behind the counter, her hands still shaking her ears, still ringing with faint whispers. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered as if they were about to go out. The shadows of the ceiling panels receded like arches, creating deep, dark recesses. She looked up at the old portrait of the unnamed man who had transferred ownership of the hotel, the eyes flickering in and out of the darkness. Mara knew she wouldn't be able to sleep until the sun rose. She turned on her walkie-talkie. Tonight something strange happened in room 612, but the person on the other end of the line just kept quiet. As darkness crept up to the window of room 301, the staff restroom Lara, the security guard in charge of the lounge and hallway behind the front desk, woke to the faint chime of a bedside bell. The clock read 4:17 a.m. By procedure, only guests using room service were allowed to use it. No one was calling at the moment. Lara tiptoed through the hallway, her flashlight casting a dim glow. The old-fashioned floral wallpaper, water-stained, looked as if the pattern were warping under the light. Lara went to room 110, which had a history of being the site of a disturbance between guests. They said the guest had been smashing and screaming all night, then committing suicide on the balcony. There was no clear record other than rumors, but the hotel still kept the room for maintenance purposes, never re-renting it. The bedside bell rang again. She opened the door to room 110. It was dark inside, the curtains drawn. No light filtered through the gaps. The bell continued to ring. Lara reached up to touch the bell button. It stopped. She tried the light switch. The room was dark. The light didn't come on. She touched the switch. It felt dry and cold. A sigh very close, right next to her left ear, made Lara flinch. She didn't turn around immediately, but took a deep breath, feeling her heart constrict. She remembered the Reddit post, "I think the hotel I worked at was haunted." Sometimes I had hairs standing on the back of my neck and goosebumps LOL. Reddit. There is also an article. One night I was checking those creepy statues. One night was gone. Checked, then the next morning saw it again. Reddit, small experiences, but enough to make the psychology of night shift workers like Lara more vulnerable. Unable to bear it any longer, Lara turned back to pull the covers off the bed, drew the curtains. The street light streamed into the room, illuminating the damp, blackened wall as if a figure were bending over it. She reluctantly stepped back, her hand touching the edge of the table, cold sharp. The window curtains were stuck. She had to use her torn hand to push them aside. Suddenly, light footsteps, very light, as if someone had lost their way in the hallway outside room 110, approached the door. Lara heard the door hinges creaking, the wind whistling through the cracks. She held the flashlight to the door shook. She crept open the door. No one was there. The hallway was empty, only the low yellow hallway light and the exit light blinking in the distance. Toward the end of the hallway, a shadowy figure, tall, thin, stood still against the wall just under the exit light. Lara felt herself freeze. The figure didn't move as she walked toward it. Each step echoed against the wall. As she got closer, the figure dissipated like smoke blown by the wind. There was no shape of a face, just the flicker of light through the cracks in the wall. Lara turned on her phone and snapped a quick photo of where the figure had been. The screen flashed. The phone lens reflected the hallway light, but when she swiped through the photo, the image was blurry, just a faint white smudge in the corner. She deleted it, thinking it might be the glare, but she knew there was something else beyond logic. Minutes later, Lara returned to her room, sat on the bed, hugged her legs, and tried to keep her breathing steady. Memories of room 612 and room 110 tangled in her mind like rope. She remembered Emily Morgan's description of the hotel, where staff and guests had seen shadowy figures or misty forms in the lobby and hallways. The Emily Morgan Hotel. The little premonitions, the glints, the cold smells are all signs that people on Reddit also talk about the feeling of being watched, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, the flashing lights. Lara heard the bedside bell ring again very softly from room 110. She grabbed her flashlight again and was about to leave when her walkie-talkie beeped once Lara, "Are you okay?" The manager's voice came through. She was startled and quietly replied, "Yes, just..." A bell ringing from room 110. The manager answered easily, "Check and report back." Hang up. Lara put the walkie-talkie down on the bed, eyes half closed, looking at room 110's door. The air felt heavier, as if the space had thickened. She heard the sigh again from inside the room, even though the lights were on, even though the curtains were still closed. Lara lay outside the door, her back pressed against the cold wall, listening to the sound of her heartbeat echoing loudly in the silent room. The clock read 5 a.m. when Lara decided to stand up, scolding herself for being scared on duty, but something had changed, the stale, musty smell in her room, like damp pajamas mixed with a faint scent of smoke. There was nowhere for the smoke to come from. No one was smoking. It was a smell Lara had noticed the day before, when Mara had told of smelling cigars or cigarettes in an empty room but couldn't find the source. It was a telltale sign of many famous hotel-haunted stories, an unidentified scent accompanied by a shadowy presence, as in the Reddit story of the night clerk. One room in particular was supposed to be haunted by the ghost of a priest. I once smelled cigar smoke so strongly in the room. Of course, whole top floor was empty. As the first light of dawn filtered through the window, Lara knew she would have to alert the manager, but deep down, there was a feeling of foreboding that something had not yet left. A knock at 6:30 a.m. pulled Mara out of a daze in the staff room. She opened the door. It was the manager, his face pale. "Lara just called the manager," said her voice low but sharp. "Someone said they heard screaming in room 110 early this morning and said it sounded like someone was banging on the door from inside. Oh, and room 612 last night, the guests said they heard heavy breathing like someone was suffocating in the night." Mara listened quietly. She felt as if her chest was being locked up. The stories that she thought were just her imagination or work pressure were now confirmed by the guests. The guest staying in the room next to room 110 held up his phone to record the shaky video, recorded the door of room 110, slightly opened the curtains inside, swaying slightly, a blurry figure behind the room's window. The guest asked the receptionist, "Is anyone there?" No one answered. When the guest leaves, they leave a warning, "I will check tonight. If it continues, then..." The receptionist records this information in the hotel error book. Mara and Lara faced each other in the reception room after Lara's shift. The early morning light filtered through the large glass doors of the lobby. They were both silent, trying to sort through the images in their heads. Shadows, tapping breathing. Mara thought back to articles that had studied the phenomenon of EVP, electronic voice. Phenomenon recordings of unidentified voices or sounds in old buildings or historic hotels. She remembered the Hotel del Coronado, the story of Kate Morgan, a woman who checked into the hotel under a false name in 1892 and never left. Since then, guests and staff have claimed to have seen her shadow or heard footsteps or seen a shadowy figure appear at night. She also thought of the Waitomo Caves Hotel in New Zealand, where staff reported phenomena like tiny bathtubs that filled with blood or felt like flying objects. Strange sounds, cold sensations passing through their bodies. The sound of a service cart being pushed in the hallway when no one was operating it. Mara's mind is in turmoil. Now part of her wants to deny everything, the other part believes in miracles, but in a creepy way. She wonders if there really is a spirit. What is it trying to say? Why is it in these rooms? Why is it that at night, when everything is silent, she is the only one who can hear? Feel. She decided to record the next night, taking a small recorder and placing it outside the doors of rooms 612 and 110, trying to find whispers, footsteps, strange sounds. She hoped she might get some evidence. The next night, when her shift began, Mara set up a recording device and turned on a hidden camera in the corner of the hallway near room 612. She closed her eyes and learned to listen to every sound: the fan, the air conditioner, the trickle of water running through the pipes, When the clock struck 2:30, she heard a gasp, the soft sound of a door opening, then short footsteps, as if someone had run across the hallway and stopped. The hallway camera caught a small streak of light, as if someone had moved very quickly, a flash near the foot of the stairs, and then disappeared. Mara felt someone's breath behind her. No wind, no one. She turned around abruptly, her foot dropping the pencil. The sound was like a hammer in the silence. The recorder continued to record. The door slammed softly as if it was closed by the wind, but door 612 was locked from the outside. When she checked the camera, the screen was black in the room, only the dim light from the hallway door. A sigh more clearly came from room 110. Mara broke out in a cold sweat. She gave Lara a slight nod. Lara had been assigned to patrol the 6th floor hallway tonight. The two met near the door to room 612, their flashlight beams intersecting Mara and Lara's shadows stretched out on the wooden floor. Lara whispered, "Do you hear that?" Mara nodded. They both stood still, listening. Silence. Only the sound of cold air breathing footsteps disappeared. Then the sound of room 110's door opening softly and closing. No one passed through the door. It felt like the space along the corridor was warping. The corridor, lights were distorted, and the shadows were getting longer, like someone being dragged. Mara felt a headache, as if the fluorescent light mixed with the darkness was hitting her eyes. The two girls bowed and returned to the reception room without saying much, just bringing back the audio recording and the small video. The next morning, the recording has very small footsteps. A sigh at 2:34, and there is a sudden silence. Then the sound of the door of room 110 slamming shut, even though the lock is still on the inside, and the hallway light flickering in room 612. There is no clear image of a face, but the light by the window frame looks like a hand has passed by. Mara didn't want to believe she was hallucinating, but the evidence added up to something she couldn't ignore. She began to have trouble sleeping, and every night she remembered the feeling of being watched, of echoes of being pulled into darkness, even though her feet were still standing. First came the smoke, the smell that lingered in Mara's nostrils like a lit cigar as she reviewed the video from hallway 612. No one was smoking. The windows were closed, the room empty. The smell had never been reported in this room before. The strange smell reminded her of a story from Reddit, a hotel night worker smelling cigars when the upper floors were empty. Mara sat in front of the small camera at the reception desk, her eyes dark with circles. She felt like someone was watching her from behind. Even though the reception desk was closed and the curtains were drawn, shadows from the hallway shone through the cracks in the glass door. One night later, as she was about to check the 6th floor hallway, she noticed that the framed photo hanging in the hallway, an old photo of an elegant man in a Victorian suit, was tilted to one side, as if someone had just pointed it out. She stopped, and the flashlight shone on the man's eyes. The eyes seemed to flash for a moment, then the light disappeared. Mara tried to convince herself that it was just a reflection of the light, or that there was a small flaw in the frame, but the cold feeling at the top of her head continued. She walked to the door of room 612, put her hand on the doorknob. It was terribly cold. Every pore felt like it was open. She turned the handle, but the door was still locked. She tried calling over the walkie-talkie. "Can you open door 612? There's a lock check." No one answered. She heard a very small cry, like a woman's moan, slightly wet, coming from inside room 612. It was very soft, as if she could only hear it clearly if she leaned her head really close to the door. "Help me." Mara backed away, her breathing quick, her heart pounding like it was about to burst. Her hands shaking, her flashlight flickering with low battery, she turned on the recorder by the door, trying to capture the sound. Her hand shook, the red rec button flashing. She held her breath and listened. It was hard to tell if the sound was real or the wind or the curtain rustling against the window, but in her head and in her heart, she knew she had heard something that didn't belong in the ordinary world. She stepped back, walked out of room 612 and headed toward the central hallway. That was when she saw water dripping from the ceiling from a small crack, a water stain, the fluorescent lights reflecting off each drop. But for a split second, she saw a small figure, Maybe a child standing by the cracked window. No face, just a small figure. Both hands pressed against the glass. Only for a few seconds, then it was gone. Mara's legs trembled and she wanted to rush to pull the curtain outside the hallway window, but her legs were like leeches, unable to move quickly. She had to automatically inhale, exhale to keep herself from screaming. Finally, she returned to the reception, slammed the door to the staff room, turned on the bright lights, the bulbs set alive. The clock screen read 5:47 a.m. She sat down, her hands holding her head, her eyes on the recording screen. As the morning light streamed in through the large windows of the lobby, she heard the front desk phone ringing a strange call. Guests saying that something in room 110 had followed them to sleep. They felt their eyes being watched, heard footsteps inside the room. Guests said the bathtub in their room had turned on by itself last night, then turned off. She took note of it all. That day, Mara and Lara met with the manager. Mara gave them the audio recording video and notes. The manager looked at it for a long time, silent. Finally, he said, "We will invite a psychic investigator just to make sure the guests and night staff are at ease." Mara doesn't know what's going to happen, but as she walks into the night's investigation, she wonders which is real, a spirit trying to communicate or just a stressed-out imagination. Is there anything more dangerous than just feeling scared? She looks up at the 6th-floor hallway, where the hallway lights still flicker, the shadows still long, the shadows still seem to be waiting for someone to come along. On the last night of their shift that week, Mara sat at the front desk with Lara. The hallway was dimly lit and silence reigned, save for the slow ticking of the clock. In front of them, 2 psychic investigators the manager had brought in were setting up their equipment, a low-frequency recorder, an infrared camera, and a simple motion sensor. They spoke little, their faces solemn, their eyes accustomed to facing the inexplicable. As the clock struck 2 a.m., the group headed up to the 6th floor. The air there was thicker than usual, the smell of mold and cigarette smoke returning lingering on the wind as if it had been waiting. A chill ran down Mara's spine. One of the experts placed a recording device at the door of room 612 and whispered a question. "If anyone is here, please give us a sign." The hallway was dead silent, but after a few seconds the ceiling light flickered twice, then went still. Mara held her breath, her eyes wide. Lara gripped the flashlight so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then a click sounded from inside room 612. The door was still locked. The key was in the expert's hand. The group's eyes were glued to the doorknob. It was shaking slightly, as if someone was trying to open it from the inside. One of the experts noted, "We have activity." Mara felt like her heart was about to burst out of her chest. Suddenly, the tape recorder made a sound, not the sound of a door or the wind, but a hoarse, weak voice, like a woman's whisper. "Help me." The voice was long and choked. Everyone stood still for a few seconds. Mara almost fainted. An expert quickly pointed the infrared camera at the door. On the screen, a bright humanoid figure stood just behind the door, its hand pressed against the wood. The figure was not detailed, just a blurry silhouette, but enough to make out the shape of a woman with long hair and a slightly bowed head. Lara stepped back, her mouth trembling. "I saw it," Mara whispered. "She was there from the beginning." As the expert drew closer, the figure vanished like smoke blown by the wind. The doorknob stopped shaking. The hallway fell silent again. A strange feeling came over Mara, fear and sympathy. She remembered the true stories in the newspapers about the old hotel, missing women, unexplained suicides, trapped souls who never left the place where they died. She thought maybe this is one of those stories. The experts put away their equipment, their faces solemn. They only said one sentence. "There is something here that cannot be removed. You girls should be careful." When they left, only Mara and Lara were left standing in the 6th-floor lobby. Mara looked towards the dark hallway, where room 612 was silent, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, she heard a faint sigh again. She softly said, as if in response I heard it, "I won't forget." Dawn broke light seeped in through the large glass windows, pushing back the darkness and the heavy feeling. But Mara knew the darkness was only temporarily retreating. It was still there, waiting for the next night, the next shift. The story ends, but in Mara's heart, the haunting never fades. Every time the clock strikes 2 a.m., she will remember the shadow behind the door of room 612 and the weak voice calling for help. And perhaps those who have worked the night shift at this hotel will also forever carry that silent fear, a creepy truth that only those who work the night shift can understand.